Blood Brothers podcast, a Five Pillars production.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers, sisters, friends, and the foes out there, and welcome to another episode of the Blood Brothers podcast with your host, Dilly Hussain, and my co-host,
Aki Hussain. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Before I introduce today's very special guest, I want to remind all the avid podcast listeners that you can find the Blood Brothers podcast on all the major audio platforms. And of course, if you're tuning in via YouTube, ensure that you are clicking subscribe, liking the video, sharing the video, and leaving a comment. Today's guest is a dear friend of mine, someone whose story never gets boring and never gets old, because there's so many lessons to take from what he has experienced and what he went on to achieve and do thereafter. He's a brother whose counsel I take very seriously when it comes to my line of work, and especially in the realms of counter security in light of counterterrorism, CVE, and how Muslims are treated post 9/11. He is a senior lecturer in criminology in the School of Justice at Liverpool John Moores University, and that's none other than the esteemed Dr. Rizwaan Sabir.
Thank you for having me.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Was that intro okay?
It was very thorough.
Thank you, bro.
Very thorough.
Jazakallah khair for coming out at such short notice.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anything for the podcast?
And I think the book, which will be the crux of today's podcast, deserved and necessitated for the podcast to happen with a matter of urgency. Bro, just to set the scene, all right? Because I know you featured on season 1 with our dear friend, Dr. Fahad. And we spoke about racism and institutional racism and you know, critical race. Did you remember?
Yes.
It was at my house.
Course,
we had a bit of barn, we had a bit of banter, wound Fahad up, and you know, we didn't actually get to speak about your unique story. And that is what was it? The Nottingham Two? What were you titled?
We were dubbed the Nottingham.
The Nottingham Two. Can you please, for our viewers and listeners, kind of set the scene as to where this all began? Why were you named Nottingham 2? What is that? What happened? And yeah, just tell us what went on.
Okay, it's a good opening question. I think we have to go back a number of years before we talk about the Nottingham 2, because there's a broader context at play. So I think actually, like a lot of young Muslim men and women in Britain and throughout Europe and the West, the story starts on 9/11, right? Because I think we all remember where we were on 9/11 at that moment. We found out, right, that the planes had hit the towers. And I was in sixth form then doing my A-levels.
I was in year 9.
Yeah, well, there you go. Now I'm showing my age.
Yeah, no, you're not that old.
So, I was always political. Growing up in a Muslim Pakistani household, with relatively conservative, talking about Palestine, talking about India's atrocities in Gujarat and Kashmir. So politics was a normal part and parcel of our daily life. But what happened on 9/11 was that this figure of the Muslim emerged in a way that I had never seen before in my life. And I think a lot of people will attest to this as well. So it kind of got my curiosity. Why were Muslims, in the name of defending Islam, attacking civilian targets as well as military in the US on 9/11? So I became more interested, and then obviously before you could pan into any kind of detail, Afghanistan, the war started, Iraq started, and then I started university. And when I got to university, coming from a Pakistani working class background, studying politics was never something you did formally. It was always a vocational,
100%.
Right, like business or management. I did management.
It's not something you pursued in terms of your plans academically,
correct, yeah.
your career.
It was literally, reading history, reading politics was something you did around the dinner table, or right. It's not going to secure you bread for your life or pay your rent and all the rest of it.
Come on, man, I graduated in BA in politics. Now you're making me feel
so did I. But you had wisdom. That's why you chose to do that first, right?
Don't say that. Don't say that.
I'm sure you've been accused of far worse than having wisdom.
That's true. Don't say that. But.
So yeah. Initially I went to university and I started a degree that was vocational. It had nothing to do with social sciences. And, like most first-year students away from home, I failed because I was too busy partying.
Okay.
And it was only when I failed, and I'd never failed in anything in life, alhamdulillah. I had a conversation with a good friend And she suggested, why don't you do something that you're actually interested in? And the only thing that interested me at that time was, well, it was the Iraq War, because everything was happening around the war, the allegations or the intelligence that was driving the war in that situation at that moment was being questioned. So there was a deep-seated curiosity. So she said, why don't you study sociology? So when I went to have a meeting with the sociology admissions tutor, they said there's no space, but you can study politics. It's like, why would I study politics? Politics is all about, the Houses of Parliament and boring male and pale men talking about whatever it is. But he told me, the admissions tutor, he goes, look, you get to study war and conflict and international development. You get to look at terrorism. You get to look at Cuba as a case study, or Northern Ireland, and all these other really interesting topics that I had no idea you could academically study. So when I started the degree, long story short, I became really interested and started really going above and beyond what was expected of me as an undergraduate student.
Give us an example.
So I'd be attending talks at the university where external speakers would come in. I'd go to seminars. I'd meet with my tutors during their office hours to talk about ideas that we were discussing in the seminars or in the lectures. And it was only then that I realized, actually, you can get a job as an academic and actually get money to talk about these issues that they're not even work. This is just
something
interesting to me. Yeah,
of course.
They say find a job that you love and you don't work a day, right? So it was that kind of philosophy. So I spoke to one of my lecturers, Steve Hurst, and he explained how the process works. He goes, get an undergraduate degree, you do your master's, you do a PhD, and you'll become a specialist on a subject, and then you can go and apply for lectureships. So it was a simple plan I found in 2003-04. Get 3 degrees and become an academic. And my interest was always in war, conflict, and terrorism as a young Muslim man, part of that 9/11 youth.
Can I just interject there? Were you not worried even at that time, thinking that as a Muslim student in further education university, that you seem to be quite passionate about war and conflict, when those kind of topics very quickly after Afghanistan and Iraq became areas where Muslims kind of stayed away from or didn't want to be known for per se?
Yeah.
Did you have your moments where you felt like, actually, I shouldn't be treading on this path because maybe there's going to be a lot of barriers and obstacles there for me and it's going to probably cause me more problems?
Or just hot? It's just hot. Did you not think that?
No, I didn't think it was hot. And the reason why I didn't think it was hot is because I was very stupid and naive.
Did you think the university was a safe space?
Did I think university was a safe space? Yeah.
Okay.
I did.
But you would believe that.
I did, but I think also the terrain was very different back in 2003. Yeah, okay. I know there were so-called radical speakers and ideologues being invited onto campus, and they'd been coming on since the late 80s, right? So I kind of knew that discourse and that practice existed.
Okay.
But never did I feel afraid. I just felt like a passionate student who was trying to understand the world in order to make the world a better place.
Cool.
And there was no problem. Because my intention was to try and help find a solution to some of the problems that we were experiencing in the world. So that's where the journey started. So politics, and this is an important point, politics wasn't just a subject area. It was an area of my personal interest. So I was researching, talking, engaging in ways that even my colleagues on my degree were not, right? So I was trying to go above and beyond. And then if you keep that context in the back of your head, you get to the University of Nottingham in 2007-08, you realize then why I'm now working 12, 13 hours in the graduate center or the library and engaging with primary documents, accessing journals, speaking with others, attending events, because I've become a lot more engaged politically and personally invested in this, because it's a career path that I need to build towards or build in support of. So that's where 2008 then emerges, and I download a document.
What was that
part
document?
Of my postgraduate research? It's known as the Al-Qaeda Training Manual.
Okay.
It's you can buy a copy, W.H. Smith's, Blackwell's, all high street bookshops.
So it's not illegal to possess at the time?
At the time, it was not illegal. It was unlawful to possess because it had been used to prosecute
Okay.
a person. You probably know the name, the lyrical terrorist,
Of course.
or Samina Malik.
Yes.
So Malik was actually convicted based on that document, as was another individual, Khalid Khaliq. But both of these cases were really interesting because, long story short, I don't want to get into the legal minutiae of it, but Samina Malik had, I think, 20 documents in her possession, which is what she was charged and prosecuted for. But then when the case went to appeal, the defense argued that actually a lot of these documents constitute simply ideological propaganda. This is not tactical information that is useful to terrorists, which is what the offense relates to. So as a result, and one of those documents, of course, was the Al-Qaeda training manual, and that case law came into existence 1 month after my release.
But you said that W.H. Smith, and you named other shops that sold it.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, you can still purchase it from W.H. Smith's. I
crazy.
downloaded it because I was a poor student from the United States Department of Justice website, which is where it was at the time. When I looked at the document, it said Government Exhibit 1677-T, which immediately made me understand that this document had been declassified and placed into the public domain, but precisely for students and journalists and researchers and librarians or whoever was interested.
To access for those reasons.
Precisely, right?
Did you inform anyone that you would be downloading this?
No, absolutely not.
Did you feel you didn't have to because it was a declassified public access?
I was just going to say, I hope you're going to ask me why I didn't tell anybody.
Yes.
Right. The context is I'm downloading hundreds of documents now as part of my literature review and an application I'm putting in for a PhD scholarship. And this document is downloaded in the context of hundreds and hundreds of other primary reports and documents and journals and so on and so forth. So there's nothing untoward about this document. I had no idea at the time you could buy it from the bookshop or you could get it from the library on loan. But it was on an American government website. I mean, why would the American government be placing documents that were useful to terrorists on their website and then arresting people?
Downloadable.
Right, and then arresting them. I mean, we know there's a whole discourse around entrapment.
Of course.
But I'm not getting into that. Point is, at that moment in life, as a 21-year-old man,
It seemed safe to access.
right, because it's on a government website.
In hindsight,
Yes.
would you have informed any authorities or your teachers or your seniors?
If you could take yourself back to that moment, did a thought pass your mind where this is a hot document?
No,
It wasn't hot though. That's the thing in my mind at that time. It wasn't hot.
Well, just by the very principle of Al-Qaeda's name being on it.
I'm asking this now, knowing what happened, which is about to tell us what happened. If you could rewind time, do you think telling authorities or your teachers would have helped?
No, for the simple reason that none of those individual teachers or lecturers were approached prior to our arrest.
Got you.
So we would have been arrested regardless
Okay,
of whether
got
they
you.
knew. And even when the police came to the university to speak with the academics, they still didn't actually tell them what document I'd been arrested for.
Wow.
So I know the story has gone all over the place.
No,
but
it's good. I'm liking this.
It kind of
We're trying to flesh it
starts
out.
in 2001. It gets to 2008. This is what drives the arrest. And, the arrest, it's well known, involved 26 police officers, codenamed Operation Minerva, where myself and my co-accused Hisham Yeza are arrested. He's an Algerian Muslim man.
Of course, just on Hisham. Hisham, our dear brother, is the founder and editor of the Ceasefire magazine, an outlet which I have proudly contributed towards. Was he lifted just by association, or was there something?
The document was actually found on his computer after I sent it. And the reason why I sent it to him was he was helping me draft my PhD scholarship application and the proposal.
Okay, got you.
So, and plus, because he's the editor of Ceasefire magazine, he has an inherent curiosity and interest.
He does.
In all these matters.
Of course.
So we would routinely and constantly meet for coffee and conversations in his office, in the cafe.
Top brother.
And just talk about politics and history, basically. So during the process of that kind of student-mentor relationship, he's a lot older than me as well. And he's very, very sharp. Intellectually very gifted. So I was in the habit of sending him drafts of my written work for his feedback, and also any articles or journals or reports or documents that I thought would be of interest to him as the editor of Ceasefire. And again, the Al-Qaeda training manual was sent to him on MSN Messenger when I was going back. But it was sent in the context of hundreds and hundreds of other documents, right? So the document was actually found on his desktop by his line manager when he was off sick. And when she saw the Al-Qaeda training manual and 2 journal articles, one called Killing in the Name of Islam by 2 academics at the University of Tennessee in the US, and another one called Bush's Revolution from Foreign Affairs, you know, that radical Islamist journal, right? It's like the most mainstream political science journal you can get in the world, probably. So these 3 documents were discovered on his computer. They were then escalated to the management at the university, who referred it to security. Security then reported it to Nottinghamshire Special Branch.
Wow.
Special Branch said this is beyond our resource capacity. So they instructed the West Midlands Counterterrorism Unit, whose remit kind of falls to Nottingham.
The Sayramis.
That's one way of putting it.
Yeah.
But the CTU unit emerges after the 7/7 bombings because the bombers come from different parts of the country, Aylesbury, Yorkshire. So it's very London-centric, the response of the police service. They say, look, we need a more permanent presence distributed around the country. And then one of the outcomes of that is the emergence of these regional hubs. And West Midlands Counterterrorism Unit is one of them, dedicated to deal with the threat of political violence. So they then arrive on campus and undertake a joint operation with Nottinghamshire Police involving 26 police officers, arrest and detain Hisham. He becomes detainee 1, and then arrest me 20 minutes after him at 10:40 in the morning, and I become detainee 2.
At home?
At the University of Nottingham's campus.
Tell us where.
Wow, what was that like?
Tell us what were you doing? Where were you? What were your thoughts? Who was around you?
The thought at that moment in time was, it's all one big mistake, and we're going to clear this up once I get to the station and tell them. I mean, I don't want to give any spoilers as well, but in the book I go into excruciating detail to describe what exactly happened on that particular morning, because it was so significant. How I was actually being surveilled at the time by undercover police officers, whilst I kind of went about my normal morning routine, you know, coffee and a smoke and a conversation about the German welfare system with a colleague. Very radical, so, you know, but I think the ultimate feeling was of complete, like, this is crazy. Like, it's not a problem. This is so crazy that nothing's
a clear misunderstanding.
And I will clear everything up until I got into custody, and then realized that my home was being raided, my property was being seized, my car had been seized, people were being questioned, I was being interrogated. And once I got a lawyer, I realized actually the police were trying to look for evidence that would incriminate me rather than necessarily absolve me of any allegations. And then I understood the process at play is extremely troubling
and far more sinister.
Yes. And I also started to feel quite powerless as a result of that. That sense of just being another number in a system, in a matrix of counterterrorism, which is what I refer to as in the book, where you can be disappeared for years. And had I not had the support structure, the kind of people who have privilege in a middle class, predominantly white institution, Russell Group, I would just probably have been another Muslim male who finds himself in a prison cell for possessing a document for which there is no criminal intent to use for terrorism.
Riz, I know you don't want to give too many spoilers, but I do want to get to the themes of the book, because there's some very important themes that I know you want to discuss, and we definitely want you to elaborate on. But just to kind of like, I mean, you've given a very powerful chronology and setting, you know, 9/11, a curious Muslim, an interest in politics, went to university, went to do sociology, settled for politics, realised there's something that you love, passionate about, you could see yourself as a career doing it, post-grad thesis, and then boom, that happened. How long were you detained for?
So in total I was held for 6 nights and 7 days.
6 nights and 7 days. And the law was that they can hold you up for how long? 28 days?
The law at that time, authorised the police to hold you in pre-charge detention for 28 days.
What's the law now?
14 days.
Okay, cool.
Still the longest period of time that you can be held in pre-charge detention for any crime. Normally, the rule is, I think it's either
48 hours?
No, 70. I think it's 4 days and 96 hours.
Okay. That's like major murder, like major...
Any crime,
Yeah.
except terrorism, you
Yeah.
can only be held for a period of 96 hours, by which case they either charge you
Or
for
let
a
you
crime or you're released without charge or on bail. But terrorism can be held, you can be held for 14. Remember in 2008, Tony Blair was asking for 90 days.
He was
That's 3
indeed.
months
He was.
pre-charge detention.
Yeah.
Yes, that dog
So,
was, yeah.
so it was a really, really dangerous precedent that would have been set. But even now, at 14 days, it's still quite unprecedented. And the reason is because the security state claim that the threat is a lot more dangerous than anything we faced in the past. Plus, with technology and globalization, things like encryption,
Of course.
different languages being used, it becomes a lot harder for them to investigate. But one does wonder how they deal with organized crime on a global level
Like this.
within 96 hours, and
Exactly.
why that same,
Can't be
that
applied
same
to-
fairness can't be applied to terror suspects,
So 6 days and 7 nights.
and then released without charge.
Then released without charge.
Yeah.
Now the post that event would have shaped you and molded you and affected you in various ways, in various times and periods up until 2022. What, in terms of surveillance, yeah, state surveillance of Muslims, and what you said, what was it? What you said, what matrix was it?
Matrix of terror, counterterrorism.
Tell us a bit about that. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so
Because
when I'm released without go on.
Because a non-Muslim, a non-Muslim, and we do have non-Muslim viewers and listeners, they would be like, okay, well, look, man, if your line manager saw an article of that nature or a manual of that nature, without us necessarily knowing what it's for, anyone will be prang about it.
Yeah, you're most certainly going to be prang about it if
it's a Muslim who has that, of course.
If it's an IC3 that's holding, or an
Of
IC4
course.
that's holding the
Absolutely.
document, right?
Yes.
And has that Muslim
Context.
So there are people that will not necessarily justify the matrix, but they'll be like, well, you guys kind of asked for it, didn't you?
I think it's a really good point. Actually, when I was in custody, I discovered this once I was released. One of my supervisors, my upcoming PhD supervisor, my master's supervisor, was actually told by one of the police officers that had this been a blonde Swedish PhD student at the University of Oxford, this would not be happening.
100%.
Which just goes to show that when you wear a hoodie late at night on a street in Hackney, for example, the police will see you very differently to how a young woman or young white male will be treated if they're wearing a hoodie.
100%.
So it's all about
Or
context.
walking a dog.
Well, yeah, right.
And if the dog's wearing a hoodie as well.
it depends how cold it is.
Yeah.
It depends what kind of dog it is as well.
Yeah,
Yeah. Some dogs you can even pop into your handbag.
that's right. Yeah, you're definitely getting stopped by feds for that.
Yeah, because that looks sinister. Right?
Yeah.
You, as a young Muslim male, would so visibly racialized. Why are you carrying a dog in your handbag?
A Chihuahua
What
or
else
Jack
could
Russell
there
in your
be?
bag.
Right. Just to stay on point, right? Bringing it back to the whole surveillance thing. When I'm released without charge, I want to make this point and emphasize it. I'm not released because they think I'm innocent, right? They release me and Hisham from custody without charge is because they recognize that the case is so weak that if they were to charge us and stand us before a jury of our peers, the likelihood of securing a prosecution beyond reasonable doubt, a conviction, is very, very, very slim, because our reasonable defense is that we're using it for academic purposes, which we were, right? So they say that, look, on the balance of probabilities, we're not going to secure a conviction, so let's not charge and prosecute. Leave them.
Because
But then what?
it's legwork for CPS, right?
And a lot of legwork as well.
A lot
having
of
to
legwork.
prove beyond reasonable doubt that we're
Exactly.
actually terrorists when we're not.
100%.
Right? So they release us without charge, but then what happens is something sinister happens. I'm released without charge with a notice, which has no legal validation or credibility, but it's basically a warning to say, look, we're releasing you without charge, but if you are found in possession of this library book again, then we're going to arrest you and reinvestigate you. Now, that's a clear coercive threat that is made.
That's ridiculous.
Which disallows me from doing my job as a researcher and a doctoral
Any
student. right?
explanation why?
No. But what also happens at the same time is then I'm subject to an ongoing process of surveillance, right? So I'm released without charge, not because I'm innocent, because I won't be able to secure a prosecution in the courts, but also at the same time they think I'm up to something. I can't be fully innocent. So the interest of the security state and the violence of the security state starts to take on a different form. It becomes a lot more sinister. It becomes about surveillance. It becomes about monitoring me at the border. It becomes about stopping and searching me at the roadside, placing markers or classifying me as a subject of interest or an SOI, as they say.
Just unsettling you and your life in various ways.
Yeah, but also not being able to accept the simple fact
that you're innocent.
They got this wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
that I'm innocent. So the violence they don't just think, oh my God, let's just stop. They continue with it. They escalate it, and so on and so forth. And that takes on this really insidious kind of form, which has a deeply detrimental impact or effect on my mental health up until this day. But we can talk about that later. But yeah, the surveillance is something that personally starts to affect me, and that's what the power of surveillance is.
You said you used state violence.
Yes.
Now someone watching like, well, they didn't beat you, did they?
Yeah. No, they didn't beat.
They didn't beat you with batons. They didn't manhandle you. So what are you talking about when you say state violence?
Okay, so when I use the word violence at its most vulgar form is a physical beating, a physical act of violence, torture, physical abuse. But actually, when you are taken into custody and placed and confined within a cell, that is an act of violence because your freedom has been removed from you, your liberty has been taken. That becomes an act of violence. Okay. Right? But also, when we're dealing with surveillance, now, if you think that you are under surveillance, what do you feel the outcome would be if you step out of line?
You're gonna get shown what time it is.
You're going to get shown what time it is. So you will face some kind of consequence because of your action.
Of course.
Right? So
raided, beats, arrest, oppression.
You feel there would be a violent consequence.
Right, a violent consequence, right? So as a result of that violent consequence, the fear and the feeling that violence may be executed against you becomes a threat.
Scary.
So surveillance is based on a threat of violence being used against you, or a negative outcome or consequence. So surveillance becomes an act of violence. So remember, coercion is not just physical violence, but it's also the threat of violence. And if surveillance is being undertaken in order to use some kind of direct violent or coercive action against you, it implies a threat. So it becomes an act of violence itself, so it becomes coercive, right? Also, there is violence that is embedded within symbols and representations, right? When we're, as young Muslims, when we're represented in the media through a discourse of Orientalism or reference to constant terrorism and all the rest of it, this becomes an act of symbolic violence. So violence can't be translated to literally. It has to be looked at slightly more broadly to say, actually, there's different forms of violence. That's why the UN definition of torture...
Is that an acceptable definition, by the way, that broader spectrum?
Well, absolutely. I don't think you can understand violence without understanding the broader spectrum, because a lot of the time, power doesn't rely on overt acts of violence. And that's what the prevent strategy deals with, right? But also, the UN doesn't define torture as a physical act of abuse. Of course it does, but it also says it's mental. Psychological torture, right? So how can an act that doesn't involve a physical act of abuse against you constitute violence? So actually violence is beyond just a physical act. It's systemic, it's structural, it's symbolic, it's psychological, which is why gaslighting and abuse in, for example, domestic abuse situations is accepted by the court to be a form of violence. So one of the reasons why I actually wrote the book was to show that violence which is lawful can be undertaken by the state, and it doesn't have to rely upon overt acts of individual abuse against you, physical abuse, but it can still have a profoundly detrimental and damaging effect on your state of mind, your ability to reason, your ability to just go about and live your normal life.
And harm you.
Right, and the levels of harm that emerge as a result of that violence.
The post-release surveillance that you were subjected to, the SOI, the markers, the stops and searches, how long did that last for?
It started in 2000 and... I mean, you'll probably be able to relate to this.
Is it still happening?
It's funny you say that, but we'll come to that in a second. Let me just give you the context to it. So you'll understand this or be able to empathize. But as young Muslim men, you probably started to be stopped and searched, when you were very young.
Bro, we can't travel normally.
Right. So even when I'm 17 and I start driving, which is when my encounters with the police start, I'm constantly being stopped by the police. What you doing? It's late.
Where you going?
Yeah, basically. Plus, I'm driving an older car as well, which drives the curiosity. Is the car got insurance? Is it MOT or whatever? So I'm very used to the idea of being stopped. Sadly, I'm very used to the idea of being stopped by the police. But from 2008 onwards, it becomes a lot more driven by something more. And at that moment in time, I can't work out what it is. It's the intelligence file that they've got that's then leading them to direct their questions, right? So it leads to routine stops and searches at the roadside and detentions at the border. So I think I've been Schedule 7 4 times. Out of those, detained twice and had my devices seized on one occasion.
Horrible experience.
Or during the course of a legal case, because of course your viewers may not know, but actually I fought a legal case starting in 2008 and I won in 2011.
You did indeed.
Damages, an apology for an unlawful stop and search under the Terrorism Act, which requires reasonable suspicion. But there is a chapter dedicated to that one particular stop in the book. So the surveillance takes on multiple forms, but not only that, but at the same time as investigating my own case and then becoming more engaged in research on counterterrorism for my PhD, I'm starting to secure information and data from agencies like the Crown Prosecution Service, the Ministry of Justice. I write to MI5, they say they don't hold anything that they can give to me. West Midlands Counterterrorism Unit, and during the course of collecting all this evidence and information, it starts to quickly emerge a very colourful picture that the state has painted about me in all of their internal and secretive documents.
Tell us a bit about that picture.
Stuff about how I exercise my rights at the roadside, how I know about the law, how the way I dress, the way I was challenging police officers when asking them for a reason as to why I was stopped, citing the law, but also things like I said something to a member of the local community and that's then logged on that intelligence system.
Wow.
Which then leads to the question, how did they
get that information?
Right, we know. I know who the source is.
Okay.
I haven't named the source in the book.
Okay.
Because my family still live in that community and I still have a connection to that community, so I can't. Right. So I know who the source is, and in the chapter I explain how this source actually, two of them, were actually in receipt of Prevent funding.
Of course they would.
So the interactions that are taking place between the police service and these individuals running this organisation are part and parcel of the Prevent strategy. Thus we find, or we can certainly deduce, how Prevent relationships are being used in order to gather surveillance data that is then being logged onto the system.
But your initial arrest and detention was unrelated to Prevent, because that was CTU entirely, right? But then Prevent got involved when in terms of intelligence gathering about you.
Correct. Yeah. So my case was not Prevent. Prevent is about the pre-criminal space, before an individual has committed a crime. So according to this logic now, because Hisham and I are in possession of this document, which is unlawful to possess regardless of
there's nothing to prevent now.
Right. You've committed a crime because you're in possession of this document. So we're going to arrest you. But what happens is, after the arrest at Nottingham, Hisham and my case, there is no other arrest that is executed on a university campus which involves the possession of documentation, primary research literature. And the reason for that is something to do with the fact that, one, the Prevent strategy comes into implementation, is implemented in 2009, a year after our arrest. And secondly, you have universities who take on the role of policing what materials are being accessed by staff and students, on their campus. So the job and the task of policing is now something that is being done internally. Now, the advantage of that is that the police don't need to rock up onto campus and execute a warrant and an arrest. They can just get the university to do that. Because what an arrest does, it generates criticism, it generates media interest, and so on and so forth. So as a result of that, you have quite a sinister and insidious outcome, and that is that nobody even recognizes that you've got this highly coercive campaign of control and political influence taking place, because it's all happening without the media fanfare that an arrest generally creates, right? So yeah, my case wasn't pursue. It wasn't prevent. It was what's known in policy terms as pursue. But actually, since then, there hasn't been another one like that, because they can use prevent to deal with it.
Was that under the CTS Act? Or are we talking pre-CTS Act?
Right, we're talking... okay, so yeah, we're talking Counterterrorism and Security Act 2015. And the reason why the Counterterrorism and Security Act 15 is introduced is because there is dissent amongst the university sector when it comes to prevent. There wasn't just a uniform acceptance. In 2009, when the strategy is rolled out across the higher education sector, some vice-chancellors are opposed to the policy. Students' unions are opposed to the policy. And I spoke to many of these people as part of my fieldwork. So actually the picture wasn't that clear. So some of them were not doing prevent. They were saying, yeah, fine, we'll do prevent. But they weren't doing it. And the government recognised, understood that actually there's no consent here, and we haven't got any teeth to make them do prevent.
Yeah.
So they then said, right, we're now making it a legal duty. By law of the land, CTS 2015, you have to do prevent.
But they gave you a statutory footing, yeah?
Right, so they made it law.
Yeah.
And that within itself, if you don't follow the law, what happens?
You've committed a crime.
Right. It's a threat of prosecution.
It's coercion again, bro.
Right.
You've now turned lecturers and teachers into state spies, essentially, and made it a mandatory duty on them to basically surveil and report back.
Yes.
There's a pressure on them.
Yeah, and it's a coercive
And
pressure.
it's part of their job now.
Yes, part of my job now as well. So
They've got a freaking camera behind us, so they're trying to listen to our convos.
Don't mess with the studio, yeah.
Carry on.
So we I can't remember the point.
No, we were talking about
The
CTS.
pressure on lecturers
Oh,
and
yeah, that's it,
university
yeah.
staff.
It's about creating a coercive environment that forces universities, teachers, lecturers, opticians, doctors, nurses to become the eyes and ears of the state, because it's not about catching criminals. It's about ideological influence and counter-ideology work. Who do you not like the sound of? Who do you not like the look of that you think we should maybe be aware of, right? So I think there's something at play there that's quite sinister and quite dangerous.
I mean, all of this is quite fascinating when you explain it in a chronological way, although brief. I imagine the book has so much more, like you said, excruciating detail around many of these events in terms of sequence. The university the experience you had after being released without charge is almost as fascinating and outrageous as the event that led to it itself, in that I imagine that went on for such a long time. What is it like now, looking back at that period, those years, and how has it shaped you?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, being taken into custody and being suspected in the way that I was, and then subjected to surveillance and ongoing state violence, it taught me that the world is not split between good and bad and black and white. There is lots and lots and lots of grey. It led to a rewiring on a very psychiatric level, a rewiring of my brain. And the reason was simple. You grow and you're socialized into the belief that the police are there to protect you. Right? And all your life you spend thinking that. Now, even though you're being stopped and searched as a 17-year-old, I did anyway, was, right, look, listen, I understand why you're doing this, because you're racist. I'm not going to say that, but I get it, right? I'm clean. So you kind of perform the good Muslim. I understand, officer, etc., etc. Deep down, but you still comply with the belief that this is a
They have their reasons.
Right, they have their reasons. You justify it to yourself, right? But after 2008 and the arrest, the level of suspicion, the level of intrusion into life and my world makes me understand that actually this is a lot more sinister. But also I'm told by the officers, as I explain in the book, that I'm going to prison, which has a deeply, deeply damaging effect on the fact that I always believe that if you were innocent, you don't
never
go to prison, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I knew about cases, I knew about Guantanamo, I knew about people who have been rendered. I'd read Mozam's book by this stage. I knew about the Guildford Four and the Maguire
But
Center.
most innocent people don't go to prison.
Right, but you're right, yeah.
Most
Most innocent people will
don't
not go to prison. And then I was in prison thinking, oh my God, I'm now going to prison for something I've not done. So it makes you question everything that you know and believe to be true. And what's kind of empowering about that is that in that deep, dark moment of complete powerlessness emerged this freedom, this liberty, this realization that, you know what, this is how the world is, and now I understand it. And had I not been given this treatment, I would never have understood it. So even in that moment, alhamdulillah, you find that sense of empowerment.
A profound lesson.
Yeah, it's yeah, and I genuinely believe it was from Allah. Like, I think these difficulties and these challenges are given to us in order to make us better people, to make us stronger people. But there was also an element of what some would call radicalization that took place in that prison cell, because the longer they kept me, the more obtuse and silly the questions became.
Were you angry?
The more angrier I became.
Yeah, so I was going to say this. As the days passed, first day, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, were you getting vexed and just angry?
There was a combination of
Did you have
emotions.
an element of hating kuffar? Because at the end of the day...
No. That was never something that occurred to me.
Or hating the state.
What I despised was their incompetence.
Okay.
They were so incompetent.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not giving any spoilers because I talk about this in the
I know.
book, right? That they were incompetent.
Like stupid. Like
Yeah, they understood nothing about academia. They knew nothing about what it meant to be a researcher, what postgraduate.
Didn't get it.
Yeah,
They had their agenda. They were chasing what they wanted to chase, and that became obvious.
Yeah, because they don't generally arrest PhD scholars or
No.
academics,
Yeah,
right?
of course not.
And
They're not used to.
you know, they're not used to dealing with that demographic. So the levels of incompetence and just stupidity were quite incredible and profound. And I remember being conflicted between feelings of sheer terror that now I'm now at the mercy of these people and these institutions who just don't get it, coupled with sheer disbelief that how can you be so incompetent?
How can you have this power?
And be
so
given this
incompetent?
power and be so incompetent. So there were a mix of feelings, but yeah, there were moments of complete sheer anger at the entire way that the system constructs you as a threat, and then labels and marks you for 99 years as someone who's involved in offences against the state, regardless of being released without charge.
There's a couple of chapters in the book where you talk about mental health, trauma triggers. And bro, wallahi, I'll be honest with you, you know what you went through? May Allah make it easy for you for the remainder of your life, my brother, because that would have scarred the most strongest of men, right? Let alone an academic who was merely just downloading a free and legal document for his studies. So no doubt that would have affected you in adverse ways.
Yeah, and just on that point, I'm sorry, make sure you don't forget the next point you want to make. But I want to make a point here that what I'm describing in this book and what I'm talking about today is not unique. This is not an exception to the rule. It is the rule, right? That every time an act of state violence is executed against a racialized person like us guys, the effect of that act of violence is profound. And it follows and it lingers with you for years, and you may not understand what is happening to you in the same way I didn't when I first started experiencing my mental health problems, my breakdowns, the hypervigilance, the paranoia, the PTSD, and all these other things. But I knew there was something not quite right. I just didn't have the tools to understand it. So what I'm describing in this book, and what I'm describing as my experience of being arrested wrongly and then all the rest of it, the only thing that makes this book and my story exceptional is that I'm telling it. Because alhamdulillah, I have the blessings of friends, family, and the blessings of God to have the ability to share this story. But what I'm actually sharing is not profound or exceptional. It's the rule.
But wouldn't your story be unique in the sense that, in the context in which it happened, you were a post-grad researcher and you got lifted on campus, bro?
Yeah, but I'm also a young Muslim male at the time.
True, 100%.
I think what Rizwan's trying to say is that what's unique is that are the details of what happened to Rizwan in terms of the story, his experience,
and the fact that you're telling it in the way that you're.
But with Rizwan saying that it is the rule, is that this is the method. So if you experience something like this, that is the method you're likely to experience. In terms of
the effect of it, the outcome.
The root.
Absolutely.
So tell us a bit about the trauma triggers, the paranoia, the PTSD. How were you managing it? What things would trigger it?
At the time, when the dust settled on the legal case and I won, and then things calmed down around 2011-12, I just felt like constantly there was this shadow of suspicion.
Not entire closure.
Oh God, no, far from it. And I kind of busied myself with my PhD. I've got to write it, I've got to submit, got to become an academic. I've been, I've faced some hurdles, but we've still got to get back to it. And the legal case allowed me to show the world that I was innocent, right? So now I'm going to get back to work. When I get back to work, I'm engaging with counterterrorism policy makers, police officers. And at the same time, I'm also able to now understand my own experience and what I went through and why I went through it. Now that's starting to have quite a damaging effect on my mental health. But I never talk about it to anyone. I never share it with anyone. I never go public with it. I don't even get help for it. And the reason I do that or don't get help or mention it is because I know the stories of people who've gone through a lot worse. So I'm thinking to myself at that stage in my late 20s, what right do I have to complain when people have been incarcerated in places like Guantanamo Bay and CIA black sites, and tortured and raped and molested by these soldiers? What right do I have? I was in Britain. I wasn't physically tortured. I wasn't charged or convicted. I wasn't sent to prison. I've campaigned. I've won a legal case. What right do I have to complain about this? I should just shut up and keep moving, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the simple philosophy. That I downplayed my own experiences and the harm that emerges.
Was that the correct philosophy at that time?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And this is the point that I make in the book, that just because an act of violence is based on the rule of law, or you're given access to a lawyer, does not decrease the harm that emerges because of that act of violence, mm-hmm. right? Whether you're having an act of violence executed against you in Guantanamo Bay or in Nottingham or in London, it's still an act of violence. That's right. It all has its own significance, it has its own meaning, mm-hmm. right? And you can't compare. This isn't victimization Olympics, right? Each case has to be measured according to its own worth
and challenged,
and challenged in its own right. Yeah,
absolutely.
So it was completely the wrong philosophy, and it was only
when did you?
It was a noble philosophy.
I
understand, and we actually had this conversation
where
we spoke, without going away from the subject, we spoke about comparing, levels of challenges in your life and difficulties and oppression, and which one is, and which one should be given more attention because of the gravity of the difficulty and the suffering, but how actually the conclusion we came to was also that oppression is oppression.
Yes.
Wrongdoing is a wrongdoing, and it must be challenged. And if Allah has given us a blessing and the ability to voice, and to have support around us to pursue something, to get to the truth and the answer, and absolving ourselves or whatever it is, then that should absolutely be done.
But at that time it also becomes, is this ego? Am I just, trying to stay relevant? Or, even when I wrote the book, I didn't want to write the book. There's a part of me, this started off as a very, very academic book. But the more I wrote in an academic tone, the more I despised the book. And it was like, this isn't what I want to say. So the writing experience was not only triggering, it became a lot more triggering when I actually started writing it all down, testimony basically. But I realized that I can't write an academic book on this subject, and why should I? Right? If I'm talking about counterterrorism, I should be talking about my own case. So actually there was a part of me that actually to empower the community, to empower young Muslims, I have to share this story that's very personal, that they can relate to in numerous ways. I think readers will be able to read themselves into the book in different ways. But I need to share the story. And writing the story was extremely triggering. And I didn't realize, there was another collapse in 2018 during the course of writing this book, which was triggered purely by the fact of writing the book, which took me back to that same prison cell and everything else that subsequently happened. But at this time now, I'm trained, because I've already had one mental health breakdown. I'm now trained to look out for the triggers. But now I'm thinking, all right, I'm aware of the triggers. They're all being pushed, but this is an occupational hazard, right? This is going to happen. It's inevitable. I've just got to keep writing. And you keep telling yourself this, that I've got it. It's all under control. It's all until bang, it's no longer under control. And you've lost the ability to use your rational faculties in the same way that you would if you were in control of your mental health. And, that's when it becomes all dark and sinister and so on and so forth. But, I think the mental health dimension is something that's greatly overlooked, that all acts of state violence affect all of us differently. And we have a responsibility to talk about them in a safe environment, in a safe way. Now, I know that this is a very public conversation that we have in the book. It's public, it's there for everyone to read. But the intention behind it is to say, look, even I, alhamdulillah, as a grown man who has a very privileged job, still suffer from this issue. What happens if you don't have the tools or the social network or capital connections to get help? You close off. You
continue to suffer.
Right.
Become very unwell.
You become very unwell. And that's dangerous, whether it's suicide, whether it's doing things that harm others, harm yourself. These things need to be addressed and spoken about, and they can only be expressed and spoken about as if they're spoken about, whether on an individual basis, therapy, or whether in a very public way to, inshallah, I hope, to inspire others to say it's okay to go through what you're going through. It's a normal consequence of living in a violent system of power, which is essentially what we live in. And let's see what the readers think of it and how they react to it. We'll see.
I think it's important to add that, as an extension to what you said there, Rizwaan, without any real meaningful support, there could be some serious harmful consequences for brothers and sisters who have similar experiences like this with the state, with police. In your journey, since you have been on this journey and experienced these things, what kind of conversations have you had with others, men, women, brothers, sisters,
family peers
who have experienced something in a similar way, in a similar area, in terms of?
Yeah, so I want to make 2 points in response to that. One is that nobody I know has directly lived and experienced this sort of harm or spoken to me about it. I think the only kind of solace I got is I read a wonderful book by Judith Herman called Trauma and Recovery, which really helped me make sense of it. But that came a lot later. Before that, when I fell unwell, my family compelled me to go and seek help from the NHS. I didn't want to. And the reason I didn't want to is because I didn't trust them. I thought the doctors were spies. I thought they were passing information to the security services. I trusted no one, not even my own family at that time, because it felt like that someone was either trying to kill me or they were trying to set me up and imprison me again for terrorism. So at that moment in time, I couldn't actually draw on the help of even my close friends or family or even the NHS.
Because you had trust issues.
Right. When things calmed down a little bit and things started to improve and I started to engage with the process with the NHS, I still couldn't trust the NHS. I felt like the person who was my caseworker was communicating information to the services. I felt like I couldn't actually express what I wanted to say because she didn't understand as a young white woman. And that's not her fault. But that's the demographic
It's the reality
that we're dealing with, right? The people that make up the NHS who are providing mental health provision are not versed in these topics around state violence, about the racism of the system, the effects that this has.
And nor do they have the social experiences that we have.
Right,
so they can't relate or
right.
understand in a meaningful way.
Right. So as a result, I was having to actually be academic and also patient.
So you're the
And that's
patient.
hard work.
It's labour.
It's exhausting.
So you're being
It's
the
labour,
patient.
yeah.
You're trying to access support and treatment, but at the same time,
Educate
You're having
them.
to educate in school.
and you're having to explain things in a way that I imagine is triggering.
Yes, yeah. So like when I'm telling my caseworker, and there were examples
frustrating.
of this, and I'm like, look, I feel like I'm under surveillance, and she's like, why would you be under surveillance? And I'm thinking in my head, but you know that I've been arrested. I've told you that this is an important part of my mindset at the moment, and it's playing a central part. Why? And she, you know, bless her, she was really nice. I don't want to say anything bad about her, but she just didn't have the ability to
But Charlie just
understand.
didn't get in it.
She can't, and it's not her fault.
And it's not her fault. We get
right?
that, man.
Because
She's not there
structurally-
yet. She's not there yet.
Structurally, the system it operates in a way to erase the experiences of people of colour and Muslim communities because the demographic in the NHS just it's structural. This is how structural racism works. Why would you be under surveillance? Why would they be watching? It's a fair question, right? And normal people, and I remember turning
It's
around
a fair
to her,
question when it never happens to your people.
right? And this is the point, right? I knew
If it's bizarre to you, yeah.
I knew that it was there. I've got evidence. I've got it there in black and white, right? There's evidence that I was under surveillance, and this is how it was expressing itself. So when someone turns around, that becomes almost like denying the lived experience of a patient, and that becomes exhausting. And it's almost like this is actually not helping. Now.
Yeah.
This becomes it becomes harmful. Right, so I tried my best to engage with it, but there were a number of different issues that arose during that process of engagement with mental health provision or services, and that's why I spoke about in the book specifically how we deal with this dimension, and we need something within our own community that has expertise and understanding of what it means to encounter racist policing, to understand how expertise does not exist in the existing system, and that we need provision, we need funding, we need the community to take a lead role.
Who's going to fund it?
Hiring. I don't know, man.
Who's going to fund it?
I don't know. But
It can't be government funding. They're going to have problems.
I mean, I've addressed this in the book, the details, but there's a general idea that this would be a community initiative
Inshallah.
in which Muslim psychiatrists and psychologists and people like myself, survivors and others, would be able to provide a space to people to come and express what it is that they feel, like a community hub almost. And you know, the whole point of it is to allow them to share what it is that they're feeling in a safe environment. And that part of Judith Herman's book, Trauma and Recovery, is the first step to recovery from trauma, political trauma, sexual abuse, or any other kind of abuse, is safety. You've got to find a space of safety. And if you're not feeling safe, you're not going to be able to actually get the help that you need and build a life for yourself. So, you know, in the book, there's a number of different chapters where I've spoken specifically about how we can confront the mental health problems, but also politically, how we can actually navigate this terrain and this particular policy area in terms of resistance, right? Because the book isn't just about, oh my God, look what happened here, this is outrageous, and look at all the power that the state has. But actually, the book documents that no matter how power may be and how it may be exercised, or how, you know, godlike it might try to construct itself, actually it can be resisted. You know, Goliath was defeated by David. And it's that same concept that we are the little people, we are the powerless community, but it does not matter. There are vulnerabilities and there are weaknesses, and we need to make sure that we understand how to resist and what to resist. Not every issue needs to be resisted, but some issues absolutely have to be resisted, right? So there is the last part of the book I spend talking about resistance and how we can basically engage in resistance in a way which is suitable for this country and the institutions that exist.
Alhamdulillah, bro. I think that's a very empowering message to conclude the podcast on. With regards to people finding and ordering the book, where is it? Amazon? Where is it? Where are we finding
it? It's available in all good bookshops.
All good, all good bookshops. Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone asks me this. Where can I buy the book from? It's like, it's a book. You get it from wherever you get your books.
Brothers and sisters, we highly recommend for you all to spend some money and buy Dr. Rizwaan Sabir's The Suspect book. If you liked today's podcast and the crazy story that he managed to very briefly tell us in this hour and a bit podcast, and you want to hear more about the events building up to it, the day itself, the days that followed in his incarceration.
Yeah, you just sink your teeth into that.
Yeah, basically, you can't. You need to be spending some peas and buying this book, inshallah.
And it's not that many P's, just to kind of.
Yeah,
I mean, the book is.
How much is a piece?
It's at the moment it's on for £13, and
Can't go wrong.
And I'm hoping it will go cheaper and more people. Will be able to read with it.
Riz, I just want to say, bro. You're a dear friend of mine, bro. I know we don't get to see each other much, and whenever we do, it's only love, and I think you're a warrior, bro. And I think you're fighting a battle in a completely different front, which benefits the space of activists and journalists, Muslim journalists and activists. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it easy for you, my brother, and accepts your work, bro. I mean,
thank you, brother.
Rizwaan, is this your actual side profile?
This is not my side profile.
No? Okay.
I've seen that nose definitely isn't Riz's.
Are we not supposed to do this part once the camera turns
No,
off? When you start like literally taking the mic.
We keep those bits in. Look, I'm just happy that we concluded the podcast on an empowering message. So, brothers and sisters, if you've experienced state surveillance, state violence, state oppression, any of those kind of things that we've discussed, please do seek help. Speak to people about it. There are family members and people within the community who would be willing to help and listen. Please do not isolate yourself and make yourself unwell. Speak to people who you trust, inshallah. And of course, always remember that Allah is on your side, and that if there is no justice in this world, verily there will be justice in the hereafter. But we seek the justice in this world, and we know that inshallah it will be served in the hereafter. If you like this episode and all the episodes before it and to come, please subscribe to the 5 Pillars YouTube channel. You can find this podcast on all the major audio platforms. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Blood Brothers Podcast, a 5 Pillars production.